You ever just get that itch to build a new PC? Today I'm going to scratch that.
The V765 from Patriot Viper is a mechanical keyboard with all the right specs, whether you're a gamer, content creator, or just an office drone. The aircraft-grade aluminum backplate provides an incredibly rigid deck to support the Kale white box switches, ensuring everyone within earshot will know you're better at typing than they are. Combine that with the IP56 dust and water resistance, per-key RGB lighting, programmable hotkeys, and custom macros, you'll be sure to strike fear into whoever is on the other end of your headset. Get all the features you want without breaking the bank thanks to the Patriot Viper V765 gaming keyboard. Click the link down in the video description to learn more.
Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. In my never-ending quest to come up with the most obscure motherboards to build a PC on, I have come up with this, the X99 server motherboard from Jginyue? Something like that? Let's see what's inside. Now, full disclosure, I have not looked at this motherboard yet other than the pictures that I saw online, so we'll see what actually showed up. First up, what is in here is the same accessory pack we get with every one of these knockoff motherboards. That is an I/O shield and one SATA cable. Now, longtime viewers of the channel know that I am a sucker for Chinese X99 motherboards, and I've reviewed quite a few on this channel. However, I have never taken a look at a dual X99 motherboard, which is what we have here today. First impressions, I'm actually very impressed with the look and feel of this motherboard right out of the gate. Every single port has metal reinforcements, that's all the DIMM slots, as well as the 3 X16 PCI Express slots. We've got aluminum heat sinks on each of the VRMs to help keep those cool. For the rear I/O, we do have an added bonus of having dual gigabit Ethernet, so we'll see what chipset is on board to power those. We've got 4 USB 3.0s, a couple of USB 2.0 ports, onboard audio, and of course our PS2 keyboard and mouse, just in case anyone has any of those still. Now obviously the biggest draw to a motherboard like this is the dual 2011-3 CPU sockets, which will hold any Xeon 2600 V3 or V4 series CPU. We've also got a full 8 channels of DDR4 memory support. Hidden away between the chipset heatsink and the PCI Express slots are actually a pair of M.2 NVMe slots, so we'll need to find out how those are wired in. I'm really hoping they are full-speed ports with PCI Express 3.0 X4 lanes. Other items of note on this board are the 8 built-in SATA ports, but what actually caught my eye were the unpopulated 8087 SFF connectors. That's right, there may be another version of this motherboard floating around somewhere that lets you connect to either a SATA or a SAS backplane. If anyone manages to track down one of those boards, let me know, because I definitely want to take a look at that one. Down here at the bottom of the motherboard, we've got a pair of USB 2.0 front headers, as well as a USB 3.0 front header. Interestingly, the front panel I/O is actually located here at the top of the motherboard next to one of the 8-pin EPS connectors. The front panel audio connector is also in a little bit of a weird spot, right here below the rear audio connector. I guess the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, especially if you're only a ½ inch apart anyway. I do count a total of 4 fan headers on this motherboard, however, as most of you know, fan header support and actually being able to control your fans is a little bit hit and miss on these knockoff boards, so I'm curious to see if this one is any better. As is tradition here on Craft Computing, I'm not just going to do a quick review on the motherboard and then call it a day. Rather, I'm going to build an entire PC, starting with the heart of this system. And as luck would have it, there's actually 2 hearts to this system. This is the Xeon E5 2690 V3, a 12-core 24-threaded processor with a 2.6 GHz base clock and a 3.5 GHz max turbo. And yes, we will be doing the Turbo Unlock mod to this motherboard, so these chips should run at 3.5 GHz the whole time. For memory, I did go a little bit overkill as I needed 8 sticks of RAM, and well, the only kit that I have with 8 sticks is the Oloy 3600 MTS set. In total, I have 128 gigabytes that we're going to be putting into this build. If you're a video editor, this might actually be a valid configuration. If you're a gamer, maybe stick with 32. Storage-wise, again, I need to see if both NVMe slots will run at full speed, so we're going with a pair of 512GB Silicon Power PCI Express 3.0 NVMe drives. Now, these are capable of about 3,300 megabytes per second read speed. I'm actually kind of curious to see, number one, if there's any kind of RAID configuration on this board, and number two, what kind of speeds will we get out of these? Though, I can almost guarantee you there's not going to be any RAID configuration inside this board. just the way it is. Keeping our CPUs cool will be a pair of heatsinks that I'm honestly surprised I have not had on this show before, and that is the Snowman MX6. These coolers are legendary, right up there with the Hyper 212 Evo for being one of the best bang for the buck tower coolers that you can get. I have some pretty high expectations for these on the E5 2690 V3s. Powering this beast is going to be the Fractal Design Ion Gold 850 watt full modular power supply, and that should pretty much do it for all of the internal components. I don't think I forgot anything. So, let's move on to the case. I'd show you the case while I'm talking about it, but it won't fit on the desk while I'm sitting behind the desk, so you'll just have to settle for this B-roll shot, I guess. Today we're going to be using the Thermaltake T6, which should be an absolutely beautiful match to all the components that I have here in front of me. And I think that will do it for everything that's going into this build. What do you say we get it all together? Measure twice, cut once. That's going to be our lesson for the day. I was planning on running the Thermaltake P6 as a fully open chassis. One thing I like about this case is that you can take off the front panel and the top panel and just leave these metal bars right here, and you get a pretty nice and attractive looking open chassis. Now, I wasn't going to end up needing all of my PCI Express slots on this motherboard. I was actually only planning on using one, so it's really not that big of a deal that one of the PCI Express slots is covered up. No, what is a big deal is that this motherboard is as far down in the case as it can possibly be, and yet it still doesn't fit in the case. As you can see, the audio jacks are right there, and they need to go about an inch lower so they line up with the rear I/O shield. So yeah, when case manufacturers give you motherboard sizes that are designed to fit inside of their cases, it's a really good idea to read those before you plan on doing a build like this, because this is a large motherboard and it won't fit. All right, it fits if I remove the power supply shroud. So I'm just gonna say this was a totally intentional case mod to better show off the power supply that's going into this case. It totally wasn't. But the good news is I can use this case. I don't have to go out in my garage and find an old case that you guys have all seen before. So we can continue with the Thermaltake P6. Back to our previously scheduled build montage. Well, that could have gone a little smoother. I will say, upon looking at both the motherboard and case specs, this wasn't entirely my fault. While I should have noticed that the Thermaltake Core P6 doesn't officially support eATX motherboards, it turns out that the X99 D8 board isn't actually eATX either. It's XLATX. So instead of 7 potential PCI expansion slots, this board requires a case with 9 of them. Luckily, the P6 is fully modular, meaning that every panel can be removed with just a few screws rather than being riveted together. Removing the power supply shroud was fairly straightforward and gave just enough clearance for the motherboard to squeeze inside. Looking at cases available on the market right now, I'm not sure there are many that would be able to actually fit the Jginyue Dual X99 motherboard. It is absolutely massive, even when looking at most server chassis. At $180, this would have made for a pretty good building block for a server or workstation, especially given the feature set of dual 2011 V3 sockets, 3 PCI Express X16 slots, and a pair of M.2s. Unfortunately, that very short list is where the good news ends and the problems begin. While the X99 D8 is using a genuine Intel C612 chipset, rather than a modified consumer chip, most of the higher-end features you might expect, like PCI Express bifurcation, IO-MMU, and PCI Express pass-through, are nowhere to be found on this motherboard. According to IDA64's system information, the chipset does indicate that Intel VTD is supported, meaning PCI Express pass-through may be possible here, though I haven't been able to check that out because I cannot find a BIOS option to enable it. Notably, while poking around the AMI BIOS tool, there is a BIOS option to enable SR-IOV support, but your guess is as good as mine for if it will actually work, as I no longer have any compatible hardware to test that out with. A couple things I can confirm on the X99 D8 are both NVMe slots are working at full Gen 3x4 speeds. Both silicon power drives scored 3300 megabytes per second reads and 1800 megabyte per second writes, which is exactly where I would expect them to perform. All of the PCI Express slots on this board are also full-speed slots, meaning if you see an X16 slot, it actually has 16 lanes attached to it. However, this being a dual-processor board, the slots will be connected to only one of the 2 CPU sockets, potentially introducing latency or speed restrictions over the bridge between CPUs. Also, while this board does support all 8 channels of DDR4 memory, and all 128GB showed up without issue, it also completely ignored the BIOS menu when it comes to memory frequency. Even with this 3600 MHz kit, I'm limited to running at just 2133. Now, this is due to the memory controller on the Xeon CPUs, and really not the fault of the motherboard, but still disappointing I wasn't able to push it any further. I was able to apply the Turbo Unlock BIOS mod to this board and push the E5 2690 V3s all the way up to 3.1 GHz on all cores. Unfortunately, that is all that was in the cards for these CPUs though, as the 135W TDP is a hard cap here. Even though the 3.1 GHz clock did give an impressive multi-threaded score of 3334 in Cinebench R15, it's still only a 9% improvement over stock speeds. What's worse, single-threaded performance is abysmal, scoring just 123 when overclocked and 114 at stock speeds. That's low-end Sandy Bridge territory, which is very disappointing coming from a 22nm Haswell E system. It's not all bad news in this build though. CPU temps were incredible, peaking at just 52 and 60 degrees Celsius thanks to the pair of Snowman coolers. Even in this open chassis, those are some pretty impressive numbers for 24 cores worth of power, especially under a full synthetic workload in Cinebench R23. Speaking of the open chassis, let's turn our attention to the Thermaltake Core P6. Sure, this build has some problems, but I attribute none of them to the case itself. In fact, I'm pretty impressed I was able to complete this build at all, given the unexpected girth of the X99 D8 motherboard. In its normal form, the P6 is a standard tower case, with room for 3 140mm fans or radiators both in front and on top. There are an additional set of fans along the rear panel as well, but these I am a bit confused by. In theory, there is room for 3 140mm fans here, but the mounting slots only allow for 3 120mm fans. The slots don't extend far enough up or down to allow 3 140mm fans here, limiting you to just 2. It's an odd design decision, especially given the fact that this case can transform into the open chassis you see here. It seems like there is plenty of room to allow for a third fan. In fact, that's how I laid out the 3 140mm fans I planned on using, but Thermaltake for some reason just decided not to allow it. The triple 120s also feel just a bit odd right here, given that there's a gap between the fan housing and the case itself. So to me, it just seems like there's no great compromise between the two setups. Other than that minor gripe, I really enjoyed building in the P6. Despite the open design, there is plenty of room for cable management around the rear, and grommets and pass-through ports for cables pretty much everywhere you would need one. I did have two issues with cabling though, and that was with the pair of 8-pin EPS connectors. I don't know exactly who to blame in this situation, whether it be Fractal Design for the short cables included in their 850-watt ion power supply, or Thermaltake for the lack of direct cable management between the power supply and the top of the motherboard tray. This case is slightly taller than usual, but both EPS cables were pulled tight to make the connections possible. But again, for being an open chassis, the cable management turned out very well overall, even considering I removed the power supply shroud because of clearance issues. Overall, I am happy with the way the build turned out, but am definitely disappointed when it comes to performance. Even if I was able to hit 3.5 GHz on all cores, I just don't see the system being worth it as a workstation. That is, unless you're looking to build a multi-gamer rig with a couple graphics cards and lowering your performance expectations. I think I might just throw my Tesla K80s in here and see how far that gets me. Dropping the setup down from 128 gigs to 64 gigabytes of memory, and swapping out for a less than premium case, this could potentially be a sub $1,000 build to support 4 gamers at 1080p. Let me know down in the comments if that's something you'd like to see me investigate. Thanks to Thermaltake for sending out the Core P6, as well as Fractal Design for the Ion 850-watt power supply to be part of this build. Everything else here was purchased off either Amazon or AliExpress, and if you want to pick up these parts for yourself, I will have affiliate links down in the video description. On your way down there, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing to keep up with daily shenanigans like this, and if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, consider joining the Patreon. Link is also down in the video description. As a bonus, you'll get exclusive access to my Discord server, where you can chat with myself as well as the other hosts from Talking Heads. That's going to do it for me in this one, guys. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. That was a big drink. Bonus beer for today has probably the best combination of brewery and beer name I have ever seen in my life, and that is from Lord Hobo Brewing, the Diablogato Double New England IPA. From Woburn, Massachusetts, clocking in at 8%, this New England Double IPA was inspired by our very own graphic designer Chuck and his band, Diablogato, who play a style of music that's not quite punk and definitely not rockabilly. It's greasy, revved-up garage stomp with a swampy swing and voodoo twang. Sounds interesting. And what better way to conjure up the sinister three-eyed gato than with a raucous, hazy, juicy bomb packed with Galaxy and Centennial hops. Bursting with notes of juicy pineapple from the Galaxy hops and further amplified by the unique and out there Quebec yeast, get ready to turn your taste buds up to 11 with this 8% bombshell. Yeah, I can smell pineapple and guava? Guava, maybe? Yeah. Pineapple and guava. Well, they definitely nailed the juice bomb aspect of the Hazy IPA. That's just straight up pineapple juice. In fact, that might make a pretty decent base for some kind of rum drink. So 6 ounces in here, and it's already starting to burn like a hazy. This one has a lot of fine particulate, active yeast, that kind of thing. More particulate than I'm used to seeing in a hazy IPA. Usually those are just opaque. This is actually like pretty crystal clear, but with just a lot of sediment in it. Final thoughts. What started out with a real rich pineapple and guava flavor, I don't want to say it turned into just another hazy, because there's something a little bit different about this one. It's not the same acid burn. It's not the same weird, burning, acidic taste that I normally get with hazies. This one's different, but in the end, it's also kind of the same, because what I'm left with after the first 6 ounces was an acidic, lactose-filled bomb that I've had 100 times before. Little disappointed, but at the same time, the first 6 ounces was absolutely delicious.